In addition, yesterday we achieved a total reset with China after productive talks in Geneva. Both sides now agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed after April 2nd to 10% for 90 days as negotiators continue on the larger structural issues. And I want to tell you that a couple of things. First of all, that doesn't include the tariffs that are already on, that are our tariffs, and it doesn't include tariffs on cars, steel, aluminum, things such as that, or tariffs that may be imposed on pharmaceuticals, because we want to bring the pharmaceutical businesses back to the United States, and they're already starting to come back now based on tariffs.
President Trump recently made a statement that stunned many in 2025. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing. I think we will make a deal with China. But it was this line that truly sent shockwaves. Maybe we'll make a special deal with China. This wasn't just political posturing. It was a major shift in rhetoric amidst escalating trade wars worth billions. As iconic American companies teeter on the edge of collapse and Asia's economic dominance surges, Trump's tone has noticeably changed. The same man who once imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese imports, starting at 10% and soaring to 145% in certain sectors, had previously rallied voters with, "We will bring American manufacturing home." So why the retreat? The answer is simple and painful. American households now face real consequences. Grocery shelves are stocked, but prices have soared. Cars, tech, clothes, everything is more expensive. Voters aren't just hearing promises anymore, they're feeling the pressure in their wallets. On Wall Street, investors welcomed the possibility of tariff reductions. They know the prolonged trade friction isn't just hurting China, it's also strangling the global economy. But this isn't solely an economic pivot, it's an election strategy, and perhaps a quiet win for Xi Jinping. He never shouted victory, but the world noticed. Trump barked, threatened, raised tariffs. China stayed silent and won. Supply chains stayed anchored in China. Global investors still favor Beijing, and now it's China, not Washington, setting the rules. At the end of this long, grinding conflict, one calm phrase from Xi Jinping summed it up. We waited. We endured. Now it's our turn. Let's dig into this quiet revolution. Trump's tariffs, pitched as short-term pain for long-term gain, are now seen as inflicting real and lasting damage. Food costs have spiked. Even second-hand car sales have slumped. Across retail, tech, and agriculture, price increases average over 17%. What was once a tough stand against China is now driving voters away, and not just in the ballot box, but in their everyday budgets. Now, Trump has publicly announced plans to lower, but not fully remove, the China tariffs. A top White House official clarified that while previous rates hit 145%, they may be scaled down to somewhere between 50 and 65%. It won't be anywhere near that high, but it won't be zero either, the official said. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent echoed this shift, telling a private J.P. Morgan Chase conference that the trade war had reached an unsustainable point, calling it a de facto economic embargo. He noted the original intent was to rebalance trade, not create a full-scale rupture between the world's two largest economies. Bessent's remarks boosted U.S. markets, sending all major indexes surging. The global effect was also immediate. Hong Kong's Hang Seng rose over 2%, Japan's Nikkei climbed nearly 2%, and South Korea's Kospi increased by 1.5%. Yet China's response was firm and pointed. Commerce Ministry spokesperson Hua Dong stated, "He who rings the bell must untie it." Blaming the United States for initiating the tariffs, he insisted that resolving the crisis would require complete removal of unilateral sanctions and sincere, equal negotiations. The Chinese Foreign Ministry backed this position. Spokesperson Guo Jian said that no tariff discussions had occurred, directly contradicting Trump's claim of ongoing negotiations. It became clear no talks had begun, and pressure would need to be lifted first. While Bessent remained hopeful about a major agreement, China's message was unwavering. Talks will happen only after concessions. In response, Trump doubled down. He called out China for failing to accept Boeing aircraft deliveries, stating, "This is just one of the many ways China has exploited us." Boeing's CEO confirmed the issue. 2 planes were returned, and a third delivery is expected to be canceled. A tangible example of the trade war's real consequences.
Kelly, thank you for joining us. Carl set this up by talking about a huge loss for the third quarter. You've got a slew of problems to tackle. And I think a lot of people look at Boeing right now and they say, how long will it be until investors can say there's no more string of bad headlines that are going to come out? Something that will make people say, here we go again with Boeing.
Well, I've said there's no silver bullet. This isn't going to be fixed in one fell swoop. We've got a lot of issues here that we're dealing with. The first thing we've got to do is stabilize the business, and obviously getting through the IAM strike is the first big step in doing that. But then we've also got to shore up our balance sheet so that we have a solid balance sheet to manage the realities of our business going forward. I think from a longer term perspective, getting focused on executing on these development programs is critical for our company. And then underlying all that is culture change. And we're off doing that. We're reevaluating the values in the company, and we really need to embark on a culture change.
Meanwhile, China has launched new efforts to retain and attract foreign investors. A roundtable organized by the Ministry of Commerce brought together 80 global firms to assess the impact of U.S. tariffs. Deputy Minister Ling Ji told attendees, "Turn this crisis into opportunity." Beijing has exuded confidence for months. Xi Jinping recently toured Southeast Asia to reinforce China's reputation as a reliable political and economic partner.
This move comes as China's President Xi Jinping visits Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia this week. Beijing hopes to strengthen economic ties in Southeast Asia amid a 145% tariff on Chinese exports to the U.S. CBS News foreign correspondent Anna Corin is following these developments for us from Hong Kong and joins us now. Anna, great to see you. How important is this tour for the Chinese leader, considering the backdrop of the tariff conflict?
It's a critical trip. It's his first trip for the year, Errol. It was planned several weeks ago, but obviously of much greater importance since this trade war escalated. I mean, President Xi is there to, shore up trade partnerships and strengthen these alliances with countries in Southeast Asia. His first stop being Vietnam. That's where he met the Communist Party chief, To Lam. He also met with Vietnam's president and prime minister, and there they signed 45 cooperation agreements, one of those being a railway development. Now, today, President Xi, he said to Vietnamese officials, let me read it to you. He said China and Vietnam should strengthen strategic resolve, jointly oppose unilateralism and bullying practices, obviously making direct reference to the United States. As you mentioned, the US has hit China with 145% tariffs on all Chinese goods, with the exemption, obviously, of smartphones, I should say, and some electronic devices. Vietnam, meantime, has been hit with 45% tariffs, one of the highest range of tariffs, although has been given a 90-day reprieve. Now, when President Trump heard about Xi's trip to Southeast Asia, he said they are trying to screw the United States. From Vietnam, President Xi, he travels to Malaysia for a few days, and then his last stop will be in Cambodia, Errol.
But even as Beijing signals strength, some experts suggest the Chinese economy isn't invincible, and negotiations may eventually be necessary. Still, the shift in U.S. policy was met with mockery on Chinese social media. Hashtags like #TrumpIsScared trended, racking up more than 150 million views. Another tag referencing his plan to reduce tariffs between 50% and 65% also exploded in popularity. One user posted, "If even reciprocal tariffs aren't lifted, don't bother negotiating." Another wrote, "We don't care." Each comment gathered thousands of likes, reflecting a rising wave of nationalist confidence in China. Despite the official tough stance, some Chinese economists privately question the long-term value of a prolonged standoff with Washington. But this situation is no longer just about numbers or trade balances. This is now a global power play. Both Trump's re-election efforts and Xi Jinping's world strategy are being recalibrated. And for all the talk of tariffs, the real consequences have bled deep into American politics. Trump's aggressive stance in the trade war has now sparked a major legal firestorm at home. A coalition of at least 12 U.S. states, including Arizona, California, Illinois, and New York, has filed lawsuits against the Trump administration, arguing that the tariffs he imposed lack legal justification. Their core accusation: that Trump misused the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to justify sweeping tariffs under the guise of addressing unusual and extraordinary threats. The lawsuits claim these actions have undermined constitutional limits and severely harmed the American economy.
Well, meanwhile, US states are taking their own action to try to halt the trade war.
There are 12 US states have filed a joint lawsuit with the US Court of International Trade seeking to block Trump's tariffs, calling them economically reckless and illegal. Tariff policy powers are normally reserved for Congress under the U.S. Constitution. Trump has claimed the authority to impose them under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. That law stipulates that the president can use trade policy to deal with an unusual, extraordinary threat to America's security, foreign policy, or economy after first declaring a national emergency. Prior to Trump, the law had never been used by a president to impose tariffs. A number of lawsuits, in fact, have been filed challenging Trump's authority to unilaterally declare trade war without the approval of Congress, including one by California last week. The state is America's top importer. Governor Gavin Newsom says it stands to lose billions of dollars in revenues. The latest suit is being led by Oregon. Here's the state's attorney general.
In a pointed statement, the lawsuit declares, "No president in history has ever invoked a national emergency to justify tariff policies. Trump stands alone." New York Attorney General Letitia James didn't mince words. Trump promised to bring prices down. Instead, these unlawful tariffs have driven inflation, cost jobs, and wreaked havoc on working families. California has also filed a separate case, claiming the tariffs have inflicted irreparable damage on its state economy. What began as an international trade fight has now morphed into a domestic legitimacy crisis, questioning the very legal foundation of Trump's economic strategy. It's no longer just about reaching a deal with China. Trump now faces mounting legal battles alongside economic uncertainty. The trade war has spilled into the heart of the 2025 political arena. But even as the administration deals with political and legal blowback, attention is shifting toward a new player on the global stage: India. In a strategic pivot away from China, Trump's trade team is pushing to finalize the first full-scale trade agreement with India, a move designed to reduce U.S. dependence on Beijing and establish a more stable alternative for American manufacturers. High-level meetings between the U.S. Trade Representative and India's Ministry of Commerce took place in Washington on April 24th and 25th, focusing on issues like tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and sectoral cooperation. Officials described the discussions as constructive and forward-looking, with plans to accelerate face-to-face negotiations throughout the summer.
New Delhi is sending a high-level delegation to Washington next week to kick off formal negotiations on an early-stage bilateral trade agreement. And with talks set to begin on April 23rd, the focus will be on ironing out key modalities around tariffs, market access, and also regulatory frameworks. Chief Trade Negotiator Rajesh Agarwal will lead these discussions, which are expected to shape the roadmap for a fast-track trade deal between the two nations.
An Indian delegation is all set to visit the United States next week to kickstart discussions to finalize the modalities of an early tranche of proposed bilateral trade agreement. The team headed by Chief Negotiator Rajesh Agrawal will embark on a 3-day visit to Washington starting from April 23. This will mark the first set of formal talks as both sides attempt to chalk out a deal in the next 3 months.
The goal? A preliminary deal by fall 2025 covering areas such as technology, healthcare, agriculture, and services, designed not only to boost trade volume but also to ensure shared gains in key sectors. Still, India has made its stance clear. We won't be rushed. We're here on equal footing. New Delhi is open to being a strategic partner, but only on its own terms. For Trump, securing this deal is more than economics. It's about reshaping global supply chains and sending a loud message to China. What's unfolding is bigger than a tariff rollback. Trump's consideration of easing tariffs on China is not simply an economic decision. It's a political necessity ahead of the election. With inflation straining voters and markets rattled, he's trying to calm both Wall Street and Main Street. But this pivot could also blur one of his core campaign messages, being tough on China. If he backtracks, will it look like weakness or strategic brilliance? Whether Xi Jinping sees this as a clear win is debatable, but it undeniably highlights the shifting reality facing the United States. Trade wars are no longer judged by economic statistics alone. They're also battles of public perception and political survival. Now we turn to you. Is Trump's potential retreat a strategic masterstroke or a sign of political vulnerability? Has his bold trade rhetoric finally caught up with him? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and stay tuned, because the future of global trade and America's place in it is still being written.